On the morning of April 12, 1993, a Monday and a public holiday in Spain, a 22-year-old student laced up her trainers, said goodbye to the housekeeper, and stepped outside into the spring air of one of Madrid's most exclusive residential neighborhoods. She had a Walkman, she had her tracksuit, she had a route she likely knew well. She did not come home. What followed over the next 2 years would become one of the most closely watched criminal investigations in the history of modern Spain. A case that gripped an entire nation, that filled the front pages of every major newspaper, that brought hundreds of thousands of ordinary citizens into the streets demanding answers. And at the center of it all, a young woman named Anabel Segura. To understand this case fully, we begin not with the crime itself, but with the world Anabel Segura came from, and the circumstances that placed her on that particular afternoon alone on a residential street. La Moraleja is a residential neighborhood located within the municipality of Alcobendas, just north of Madrid. By the early 1990s, it had become one of the most sought-after addresses in the entire country. Large detached homes sat behind private gates. The streets were wide and quiet. It was, by any measure, a neighborhood designed for comfort and privacy. This was where the Segura family lived. According to available records and reporting from the period, Anabel Segura Fallers was 22 years old at the time of her disappearance. She was a student of business administration, empresariales as it is known in the Spanish university system. By all accounts, she led a normal life for a young woman of her background and generation. Her father, José Segura Nájera, was a businessman who had built his career in Germany before returning to Spain. He had married a German woman, Sigrid Fallers, and the couple had 2 daughters. Anabel was the elder. The family had settled in the affluent surroundings of La Moraleja in the urbanización known as Innergolf. On April 12, 1993, the Monday of Easter week, a national public holiday, the Segura family was not at home. According to what was later established by investigators, Anabel's parents and her younger sister had traveled to Marbella for the holiday. Anabel, however, had returned early from a separate trip. She had been vacationing in Granada, but had come back to the family home ahead of her relatives, apparently without incident and without apparent concern. She was alone in the house, or nearly so, with only the family's domestic employee present. At 2:30 in the afternoon, according to investigators, Anabel Segura said goodbye to the housekeeper, stepped outside dressed in a tracksuit carrying a personal stereo, a Walkman, and went for a run. She was 22 years old. It was the last time she would be seen alive by anyone who knew her. Before we describe what happened on that afternoon, it is important to establish, based on what was later confirmed by court proceedings and confessions, who was responsible, and what, according to investigators and judicial records, their intentions were. The 2 men later convicted in this case were Emilio Muñoz Guadix and Cándido Ortiz Aón. Emilio Muñoz Guadix was 38 years old at the time. He worked as a transporter, a delivery driver. He was married and had 4 children. According to investigators and court records, Muñoz had a prior criminal record and was experiencing significant financial difficulties at the time. Cándido Ortiz Aón, known by the nickname Candy, was 35 years old. He worked as a plumber. He was also married and had 2 children. Both men were, by all outward appearances, ordinary citizens. There was nothing in their backgrounds that would have marked them as likely perpetrators of what was to come. According to what was later determined by investigators and confirmed through judicial proceedings, it was Emilio Muñoz who conceived the plan and who persuaded Cándido Ortiz to participate. The plan, as investigators described it, was straightforward in its premise. Go to an affluent neighborhood, abduct a young woman, demand a ransom, collect it, and release her. According to the investigation, the scheme was conceived as something quick and uncomplicated. It required no safe house, no elaborate preparation, no network of accomplices. It was, according to all subsequent evidence, deeply and fatally improvised. The neighborhood they selected was La Moraleja. Court records indicate that Muñoz's transport work had previously taken him to the area. He had carried out jobs there with his company, which is consistent with his familiarity with the location. On April 12, 1993, the two men drove a white van into the urbanization Innergolf. They were looking for an opportunity. What they found was Anabel Segura. At approximately 14:30 hours on April 12, 1993, according to investigators in the timeline later reconstructed from witness accounts and confession, Anabel Segura left her home and began running through the Innergolf. The afternoon was typical of Madrid in early spring. Quiet. The public holiday had emptied the streets further than usual. According to the investigation, as Anabel reached the vicinity of the Scandinavian school, a white van pulled up in front of her. What happened next was established through physical evidence, the confession of one of the perpetrators, and the testimony of a witness. According to investigators, one of the two men, identified through later proceedings as Emilio Muñoz, while Candido Ortiz remained behind the wheel, approached Anabel on foot. Court records and investigative findings confirm that Anabel Segura did not comply without resistance. On the contrary, according to the evidence, she resisted forcefully. She was, by all accounts, athletic and physically capable. The struggle was significant enough that during the confrontation, she lost both the jacket of her tracksuit and her Walkman on the ground. According to investigators, the noise of the altercation was sufficient to alert a gardener employed at the nearby school, who came outside upon hearing the commotion. That gardener, according to the investigation, arrived outside in time to observe a white van driving away. However, as was later established, he was not wearing his eyeglasses at the time, and as a result, he was unable to provide investigators with either the vehicle's license plate or its make and model. He returned inside and called the police. According to investigators, by the time that call was made, Anabel Segura was already inside the vehicle, being driven away from La Moraleja. The abduction had taken place in broad daylight on a public holiday in one of the most affluent and ostensibly secure neighborhoods near Madrid. And the two men who had carried it out had no plan for what came next. According to investigators, in the account that later emerged from confession and court proceedings, the hours immediately following the abduction were defined by disorganization and escalating fear on the part of the perpetrators. The plan, such as it was, had already collapsed. During their time with their captive, the two men questioned her. According to what was later established, Anabel Segura told them that her parents had money, but that they were not in Madrid. This was a critical complication. The perpetrators had not prepared for this possibility. They had no location, no safe house, no prearranged space where they could hold a captive for any length of time. And critically, according to the investigation, their captive had seen them. She could identify them. For several hours, according to the investigation, the two men drove along roads through the provinces of Madrid, Ávila, and Toledo, moving without a clear destination, according to investigators, caught between the impossibility of their plan and the weight of what they had already done. According to court records, Emilio Muñoz attempted during this time to make contact with Anabel's family. Those attempts were unsuccessful. Her parents were in Estepona, Marbella. The family home was unreachable in the way the perpetrators needed. As darkness fell, the two men drove toward Numancia de la Sagra, a small municipality in the province of Toledo. At the edge of that town, investigators later confirmed there was an abandoned brick and tile factory. According to the investigation, it was here that the final events of April 12, 1993 took place. Court records established that Anabel attempted to escape. According to investigators, she was restrained, bound at her hands and feet. The investigation later determined that Emilio Muñoz strangled her. Her body was buried in the rubble area of the abandoned factory complex. According to the forensic findings later confirmed by investigators, Anabel Segura was killed at approximately 21:30 hours on April 12, 1993, the same day she disappeared. She'd been alive for approximately 6.5 hours after the abduction. She was 22 years old. Her family in Marbella did not yet know she was missing. April 12th passed. April 13th passed. The family returned from Marbella to find Anabel gone. A report of her disappearance had already been filed. The gardener's call on the afternoon of the 12th had set an initial alert in motion. But without further information, investigators had little to act on. Then, on the evening of April 14th, the calls began. According to investigators, the first effective contact from the perpetrators came at 20:07 hours on April 14th, 48 hours after the abduction. Records indicate that a separate, unsuccessful call had been attempted 7 minutes earlier at 8 p.m. In that call, a ransom demand was made, 150 million pesetas. According to the timeline established by investigators, the perpetrators indicated that payment was to be made at 1800 hours on April 16th. 150 million pesetas. In the Spain of 1993, this was a very large sum. It reflected the perpetrators' assessment of the Segura family's financial means and their assumption that the family could mobilize that amount rapidly. By the time that ransom call was received, the disappearance of Anabel Segura was already front-page news across Spain. According to accounts from the period, the case had spread rapidly through television, radio, and the press, generating a level of public attention that was, for a kidnapping case at that time, described by observers as unprecedented. A nation was watching, and the Segura family was at the center of it. The family appointed a spokesperson to handle communications with both the media and, critically, with the perpetrators. That spokesperson was Rafael Escuredo, a figure of public standing who had previously served as president of the Junta de Andalucía, the regional government of Andalusia. His role was to manage the delicate and dangerous process of negotiating with people who, as far as the family and investigators knew at that point, still held Anabel alive. The third call from the perpetrators came on April 16th, the date they had themselves set for payment, at 19:33 hours. According to investigators, the Segura family had by that point managed to assemble 63 million pesetas. The perpetrators had demanded 150 million. Upon learning that the family had gathered less than half the demanded amount, the caller ended the conversation abruptly. No exchange took place. No proof of life was provided. Over the weeks that followed, according to investigators and court records, 2 separate attempts were made to deliver the ransom, both of which failed when the perpetrators did not appear to collect it. The first attempt was made on the night of April 19th in the area of kilometer 126 of the N2 National Highway near Guadalajara province. According to investigators, the perpetrators did not show up. The second attempt was made on May 6th in the town of Tarancón in the province of Cuenca. Again, according to investigators, the perpetrators failed to appear to collect the payment. Telephone contact between the perpetrators and the family continued on April 29th and on May 5th and 6th, but each call ended without a resolution and, critically, without any proof being offered that Anabel was still alive. For a family placing all its hope in the possibility of a safe return, the absence of proof of life was devastating and, in retrospect, significant. Investigators noted, in relation to the first attempted exchange near Guadalajara, that a white van was observed passing through the area of Saúza, near the designated meeting point. The driver was identified as a forestry worker and was subsequently investigated. According to the investigation, that inquiry produced no conclusive results. Then, silence. No contact was made between the perpetrators and the family between May 6th and June 22nd, a gap of more than 6 weeks. The resumption of contact on June 22nd came, according to investigators, following a broadcast of the television program Código Uno, a program dedicated to the coverage of the case. The perpetrators made contact following that broadcast. During the June 22nd call, according to investigators, when an agreement was reached, the perpetrators would provide a recording of Anabel's voice as proof of life. The call was long enough for investigators to trace its origin to a telephone booth in the district of Vallecas in Madrid. On June 24, 1993, 2 days after the call in which a proof-of-life recording had been promised, the Segura family received an audio tape. According to the investigation, the voice on that tape was not Anabel Segura's. Investigators later determined that the woman on the recording was Felisa Garcia, the wife of Emilio Muñoz. She had, according to court records, impersonated Anabel Segura on the tape in an effort to make it appear that the captive was still alive. This was a deception of particular significance. At the time of the recording, June 24, 1993, Anabel had already been dead for more than 2 months. The tape was not immediately identified as fraudulent. It was broadcast publicly, first on several radio stations on January 20, 1994, and subsequently on April 9, 1995, during an episode of the nationally broadcast television program Quién Sabe Dónde, a program specifically dedicated to missing persons cases, which had become a significant platform for the Segura case. Investigators also made portions of the actual telephone calls from the perpetrators available to the public, in the hope that someone might recognize the voice. At the time, the existence of this tape and its broadcast was understood by the public as evidence that Anabel might still be alive. The family continued to operate on the basis that a resolution was possible. The investigation continued. No one yet knew that the voice on the tape belonged not to a kidnapping victim, but to the wife of the man who had killed her. As the months passed and no resolution came, the case of Anabel Segura moved beyond the pages of newspapers and into the streets of Spain. According to accounts from the period, public demonstrations took place demanding Anabel's liberation. Citizens who had never met her or her family organized and marched. The case had, by the standards of the time, generated a scale of public engagement that observers described as extraordinary for a kidnapping investigation. The media coverage was extensive and sustained. Programs like Código Uno and Quién Sabe Dónde dedicated significant airtime to the case, and their coverage proved ultimately to be instrumentally important to the investigation, not merely as publicity, but as a mechanism through which critical information would eventually surface. With that level of public engagement, however, came complications that investigators had to manage carefully. According to accounts from the investigation, a significant number of self-described psychics and clairvoyants made contact, claiming to have information about Anabel's location. Each claim required, at minimum, some evaluation of its credibility. None produced results. More seriously, investigators reported that individuals without any connection to the case attempted to exploit the family's desperation for financial gain. According to accounts from the period, multiple attempted frauds were identified. In late March 1994, a separate kidnapping case in Spain reached a positive resolution. A pharmacist from the town of Olot was released safely on March 27, 1994, after being held captive. According to accounts from the time, this development was significant for the Segura family. It demonstrated that kidnapping cases could end with the safe return of the victim and provided a measure of hope in what had become an increasingly long and agonizing wait. While the public face of the investigation involved press conferences, broadcast appeals, and the management of public pressure, the technical work of investigators continued quietly in parallel. One of the most significant leads in the entire case came not from a physical clue or a witness sighting, but from careful analysis of an audio recording. According to investigators, analysis of the audio tape, the one containing the fraudulent proof of life recording, revealed something unexpected in the background of the recording. The voices of children playing could be heard. Those voices carried a specific regional accent, identified as characteristic of the province of Toledo. Additionally, according to the investigation, to a specific local word, a term particular to a distinct area, was audible in the background. This combination of acoustic evidence, a regional accent, and a geographically specific vocabulary allowed investigators to focus their attention on a particular comarca within Toledo province. It was a significant narrowing of focus in an investigation that had, for more than a year, generated many leads and few results. The linguistic analysis of a background detail in a fraudulent audio recording pointed investigators toward a specific part of Spain. It would not be enough by itself to identify the perpetrators, but it was, as subsequent events would confirm, a genuine step forward. In June 1995, more than 2 years after Anabel Segura disappeared, the case broke open. According to the investigation, the critical development came not from a technological advance or a forensic discovery, but from a listener. An ordinary member of the public who had been following the case made contact with investigators and reported that he had recognized the voice on the recordings that had been made public. According to the information provided, the voice belonged to a man named Emilio Muñoz, a delivery driver who, the informant stated, had recently been in his presence. The tip was specific, and investigators began immediately to assess its credibility. What they found was a convergence of details that aligned with everything the investigation had established over the previous 2 years. According to investigators, the following elements aligned. Emilio Muñoz was from Toledo, consistent with the regional accent identified in the audio analysis. His transport company had carried out work in La Moraleja, explaining his familiarity with the neighborhood where the abduction took place. A brother of his lived near the area of Guadalajara that had been designated as the first ransom exchange point, consistent with the decision to set that location. He was married and had children, consistent with the domestic sounds, including children's voices, captured in the background of the audio recording. Each element of the investigative profile, built over 2 years, pointed toward the same man. On September 28, 1995, Emilio Muñoz Guadix was arrested. According to investigators and court records, Emilio Muñoz did not require prolonged questioning. Upon his arrest on September 28, 1995, he confessed immediately. He confirmed his role in the abduction. He confirmed the role of Candido Ortiz Aon, and he told investigators where to find Anabel Segura. According to the confession and the subsequent investigation, the body of Anabel Segura had remained for more than 2 years, where it had been placed on the night of April 12, 1993, in the rubble area of the abandoned brick and tile factory in Numancia de la Sagra, in the province of Toledo. Investigators went to the location. The remains were found exactly where Muñoz had indicated. For the Segura family, the confirmation of what investigators had found marked the end of more than 2 years of uncertainty, of hope, however diminishing, that their daughter and sister might somehow still be alive, of ransom negotiations that had, in reality, been carried out with men who knew Anabel was already gone. The case was no longer a missing persons investigation. It was a murder investigation, and the perpetrators were in custody. Following the recovery of Anabel Segura's remains and the full investigation that followed, forensic findings allowed investigators to establish, with reasonable precision, the timeline of her death. According to the investigation's conclusions, Anabel Segura was killed at approximately 21:30 hours on April 12, 1993, the same day she was abducted. The investigation concluded that Anabel had survived approximately 6.5 hours after being taken. This finding carried particular significance for understanding the totality of what had occurred. For 2 years, through ransom calls, tape recordings, broadcast appeals, public demonstrations, and family negotiations, Anabel had already been gone. Every call demanding money had been made with the knowledge that there was no captive to release. Every promise of proof of life had been, by definition, a deception. According to court records, the cause of death was strangulation. Emilio Muñoz was identified by investigators and confirmed through confession as the individual directly responsible. The forensic investigation confirmed the account provided in the confession and established the location of the crime, the abandoned factory in Numancia de la Sagra, as the place where Anabel Segura had been killed and buried. The criminal proceedings in this case involved not only the two men directly responsible for the abduction and death of Anabel Segura, but also a third individual, Felisa Garcia, the wife of Emilio Munoz. According to court records, Felisa Garcia was the woman who had recorded the fraudulent proof of life tape on June 24, 1993, the recording in which she impersonated Anabel Segura's voice. In her own testimony, according to court records, Felisa Garcia maintained consistently that she had acted out of what she described as overwhelming fear of her husband, that she had participated not willingly, but under duress she felt she could not resist. The judicial process addressed this question through the standard framework of Spanish criminal law. The trial court, the Audiencia, sentenced her to 6 months of imprisonment. On appeal, the Supreme Court of Spain increased that sentence. According to court records, Felisa Garcia was ultimately sentenced to 2 years and 4 months of imprisonment for the offense of encubrimiento, the Spanish legal term for concealment or obstruction, analogous to being an accessory after the fact. The trial of Emilio Munoz Guadix and Candido Ortiz Aon concluded in 1999, 6 years after the crime that was at its center. According to court records, both men were convicted and sentenced to 43 years of imprisonment. The legal proceedings took into account the full range of the criminal conduct involved, the abduction, the killing, the sustained deception of the victim's family over more than 2 years, and the fraudulent ransom negotiations conducted with the knowledge that the victim was already deceased. The subsequent history of the two convicted men differed significantly. Candido Ortiz Aon, who had been 58 at the time of sentencing, became ill while incarcerated. According to available records, he died in Ocaña prison in 2009. Emilio Munoz Guadix served a portion of his sentence but was released in 2013, before the full term had been served. His release came as a direct result of a significant legal development in Spain, the nullification of what was known as the Parot Doctrine. The Parot Doctrine had been a judicial interpretation applied by Spanish courts from 2006 onward that extended the effective time served by prisoners convicted of serious crimes, including terrorism and major criminal offenses. In 2013, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the doctrine violated the European Convention on Human Rights. As a consequence, a number of prisoners serving sentences under its term, including Emilio Munoz, became eligible for early release. According to accounts from the time of his release, Munoz stated publicly that he was remorseful for his actions and sought forgiveness from the Segura family. On April 12, 1993, a 22-year-old student named Anabel Segura went for a run. What happened that afternoon, and in the hours, months, and years that followed, was documented with care by investigators, reported with extensive coverage by the media, argued before the courts of Spain, and ultimately resolved through a combination of patient investigative work and the vigilance of an ordinary member of the public who recognized a voice. The investigation confirmed a timeline of 6.5 hours between abduction and death. It confirmed the location of a crime in an abandoned factory in a small Toledo town. It confirmed the identity of two ordinary men who had carried out an act with consequences they had not, according to all available evidence, ought to fully anticipated, and who had then sustained a 2-year deception in an attempt to profit from it. It confirmed the role of a third individual who participated in that deception and was held accountable by the courts. And it confirmed, through the processes of the Spanish judicial system, that the perpetrators had been identified, tried, and sentenced. The case left a mark on Spanish society that persisted well beyond the final verdict. It raised questions about security in residential areas, about media coverage of kidnapping cases, about the capacity of the justice system to adequately account for crimes of this nature, and about the human cost of a 2-year investigation conducted in full public view. Those questions do not have simple answers. They were not resolved by the trial in 1999. They remain part of the case's legacy. Her case remains one of the most significant criminal investigations in modern Spanish history.